So, welcome everybody in this webinar of the BeyondXR cluster. This is John Soldatos from company Innovax and the XR 5.0 project, who I am involved in the organization of this webinar. This is the fifth webinar of a series. The topic is focused on extended reality standards, interoperability, and compliance. We would like to hear about the work of projects like Spirit, like XR2Industry, but also XR for Europe on standardization, also on compliance and policy making. Before we start, we have three excellent speakers today. I would just like to say a few things. The first thing is that this is the fifth in a series of webinars. So it's always a good idea to check in the BeyondXR cluster page and LinkedIn group, but also in XR 5.0 for previous webinars, recordings, presentations, but also for future webinars and activities like joint publications, white papers, books that we are planning for the next months. One day we would like to talk about the standardization activities of XR 5.0, not today, but we are working because we are an industrial project. We are working on some standardization activities, shedding light on how to structure XR applications for industry in the reference architecture of the open group, and also in the next release of the industrial internet reference architecture. Speaking of standards, I would like to bring to your attention, to the attention to everybody, a new initiative by BDVA, the Big Data Value Association, and the Openverse project. They are establishing a new working group. The Stand ICT project is also involved through an MOU, and they invite our community, they invite all of us to contribute to this group, to become members, and to attend meetings, and to give contributions based on our project. So this is an opportunity for everybody that I would like to bring to the attention of the speakers, but also of our audience today. If you want more information, we are happy to share more information. Offline, also, BDVA members are now part of the BeyondXR cluster, so you can find and interact with them directly. And sorry for taking some time. Now let's move to today's webinar. This is our agenda. We have three excellent speakers: Erwin Delay, XR2Industry project; from Spirit, Professor Helman Hellwagner; and Michael Bangrover from XR for Europe. I will let them introduce themselves, introduce their projects and their talks properly. Before doing that, just to say, please mute your microphones unless you want to ask a question, unless we are speaking, you are a speaker, or you want to ask a question at the end of the presentations. Questions are also welcome through the chat. So thank you for being here mid-July. Without any further delay, I'll give the floor to Erwin. Please, Erwin, share your presentation, introduce yourself, introduce your project. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I will share my screen and start my presentation. So I hope you can see the first slide. So welcome again. So with our small Belgian company SupportSquare, we're a partner in the project XR2Industry. And so the tagline is tailoring extended reality to industry's needs. The project contains a mixture of hardware development and software development and research. And so one of the members of the project is Lynx, a French headset builder. And so that's a crucial part of the project. There's also some additional hardware developments for extension modules, sensors, connectivity stuff. But then there are also fundamental blocks on the software side. And that's what one of these blocks I would like to present today. And it's to build a federated XR content repository ecosystem, for which we hope it could be a future-proof solution that would address a number of pain points. And in the presentation, I will go through 5 sections. First, and I think this will not be new for anybody in the audience, just a quick mention of what do we mean with XR content. Some example use cases that will illustrate some hurdles that people encounter daily when they work with XR content. And so a bit of an introduction on what could be the cause with the current landscape for these issues. And then the vision and approach we want to implement in the XR to Industry project, but by definition is meant to be extended towards partner projects and other interested parties. So thanks again for the invitation to be able to tackle this topic in this session, and I hope we can get discussion and collaboration started. So what do we mean with XR content? Well, there's all kinds of variations, of course. Everybody knows XR is kind of group name for virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. In our context, industrial contexts, it would mean, for instance, VR for training, preparing 3D models of complex equipment, of virtual workplaces, having mixed reality support for machine inspections or stepwise instructions to disassemble or to repair equipment. And so there's all kinds of assets that are interesting for this use case. And typically they are about very rich and interactive models. And as a consequence, it's about large files, typically with complex formats and lots of variations in how they are handled and stored and shared. In industrial context, they also may contain proprietary information that is quite sensitive inside a company or in a partner community, and that is not where people are not willing to just let it loose on the internet, let's say, and have no control on what happens with it afterwards. Thing with XR that may require specific devices, so there's some compatibility problematics that are involved, and they require significant effort to create and also to maintain afterwards. So it's not a thing you get for free, XR content. And so as a consequence, in some use cases, you might want to look around and see, okay, how can we improve current situations? For instance, there might be a company interested in creating an XR twin of a workplace. And for that, it would hire developers. Typically, industrial companies don't have this competence in-house. And these external developers, they will start looking around, what can we reuse? There might be some generic scenes, some generic 3D assets that they can find all over the place, and combine that with specific proprietary elements. Instead of remodeling and rebuilding or scanning everything and trying to construct new assets from scratch with every request from a customer. But in the current situation, it's not that straightforward. Where do you find existing assets and models? What are the constraints for using them? And are you able to guarantee towards your customer, being an XR developer towards your industrial customer, that they can use it in any way that they would like to apply it? Another typical use case, VR training, where in many situations, people that are not really versed in XR technology or in all the issues surrounding XR, they just want to assemble learning programs, training programs, and they will combine different learning technologies, and they want to figure out, okay, where can I find the right material in the right technology that can together lead to a full learning path to make sure I can train my people and improve them on some critical competences. And okay, lots of these companies look towards developing custom new VR content, but they will rapidly see that's quite expensive. So they will also look around for what is out there, what might be relevant, and how can I find the right things that might be relevant for my case. And then a third case that we often see around this is collaborations between education providers, for instance, in vet schools for technical workers, for training students to become technical workers, and manufacturing companies that are looking for these kinds of profiles. And often they have existing XR materials available for their personnel, for their customers, and they're quite willing to share that with the vet schools. And but they want to keep control on how they share and with whom they share, because they don't want to have this material just running loose towards potential competing companies. On the other hand, the vet schools, they are not that well versed in finding all these different available assets. So they need a solution to easily discover available XR material, but maybe also other innovative tech materials. So in these three contexts, we see a mixture of end users looking for stuff that is available out there, but where to find it, or developers looking for partial solutions, assets that they could reuse and integrate in their new XR content. The problem is that everything that's out there lives in silos. There are some vendors that have their own closed platforms. There are some industrial end users that create their internal repository, so they have a solution for internal sharing. There are lots of research projects like ours and others in this webinar that produce assets, but projects are short-lived, and so there's a risk that they are no longer sustained and offered afterwards. And in general, there's lots of uncertainties and potential risks of reusing and finding and integrating existing assets. So in this scope of looking for and reusing XR content, there's an issue about discoverability. Where do you go? Where to look for things? How do you know that there are things, repositories out there that you might consult? And in each different system out there, you need to get to learn the way that you can find things in there, if they're reachable through some public interface. Once you think you found something, okay, how do you make sure that you can reuse it? Both on a technical level, there might be some incompatibilities, some frictions. On a licensing level, how do you know it matches well to your context of use? Because there is no unified approach to documenting how things are usable and what context they're relevant for. And then, okay, how do you get it into your workflow, integration topics? And at the end, let's say a combination of all these things and with a lack of really substantial focus on reusability, there's also a problem of sustainability. How do you make sure that things stay available and maintained? So we've been looking around to potential solution. I think we're not the only one for sure. And there's many projects and parties looking at solutions for this. But we found the concept of data spaces, which is a European strategic effort, combination of architecture and community building and governments, that has similar issues and that tries to solve them. At the origin, not for XR or other media content, but for data sets in different contexts in industry and agriculture. And so the overall tagline is that they want to create an open and fair space for data sharing, in our case, for content sharing, where we try to connect providers and consumers in a trusted environment that is not monopolized, is not owned by one party, but allows people to transparently work together and share things. So when we look at the 4 problem areas I mentioned before, the discoverability, the goal and the architecture leads to a situation where you can have one entry point and you can see all the content that the different providers want to share with you. And they have quite some control on that. And there's a standard behind this to create aggregated catalogs that you can then browse and search in. The metadata, you can define what you want to see as shared metadata for all the assets in the catalog. And besides, you could say, content descriptive metadata, there's also a standardized approach to define constraints and policies for seeing things and using things once you would have a permission to use them. So this standardizes already two things. It's, okay, how can you feed as a provider the catalog? How can you reach and consult the catalog as a consumer? And what kind of information will you find there? And it's a combination of what is relevant for me and I'm not sure I can use it in the right way. On the integration level, there's APIs that are available, so you can access these data space, content space services in a standardized way as well and integrate it in your existing platforms. That also makes it much easier to find and use content from many different sources through this unifying architecture. We were first looking for something that we were calling a marketplace, but with this data space architecture, a big difference with, we could say, traditional marketplaces like the Amazons and the bol.coms in the Benelux and other existing players, is that there you have a single monopolistic owner of the platform, and the providers and consumers need to agree and depend on the searches and conditions that this monopolistic owner enforces. With this data spaces architecture, with this federated architecture, providers remain sovereign and they keep control over how and what they want to offer. It also gives them the right support to create and track agreements and usage of their work. And in the end, the end result is that if this would be a vibrant community of providers and consumers, we hope it's quite sustainable and future-proof because there's no dependence on one single point of ownership or failure. So as I mentioned, the providers maintain control of their content and how and to whom they want to license and offer it. Consumers have a very easy way to find all the linked content. And the architecture technically already caters for different business models that you might want to implement on top of this, and that they might be mixed in one common environment. And depending on the profiles of the consumers, you might offer your content for free, and then you see, okay, this request is coming from a commercial party. There's another way of licensing the same content to this party. It gives lots of flexibility towards the providers to create policies and to support contract negotiations in this architecture. And we hope that through this unification, people will be more motivated to look for things to reuse instead of rebuilding everything, and to look for collaborations instead of duplicating and working in isolation. So with this kind of system, a developer can look around for what he or she might need. There's a quite fully featured way to browse and discover content, to find the conditions of use, and to start a contract negotiation. Within this architecture, the software protocols support a kind of contract negotiation, and you can match what you want to have as usage constraints as a consumer with what the provider is willing to offer. And in the end, you get an agreement, and you can then access the digital assets and integrate them in your workflow. At that point, you get the result in your own, probably internal platforms, and you can use them towards your end users. Vice versa, when you create something new and you're willing to share it, you can also act as a provider yourself and submit your new content to this data space, to this content spaces catalog. I will not go into too much details, but there are some crucial concepts that are catered for. So there's a feature that is about identifying participants and content. There are, of course, the catalogs, which are a crucial service, and they contain offers, and offers are a mixture of metadata about the content. It's important to understand that the content itself is not duplicated in the data space, in the content space. It stays in the platforms of providers, but the metadata is in the data space. And it also contains the policies and the protocol to browse catalogs. And so all these different concepts are specified in the standard or specification behind this data space architecture. The contract negotiation workflow is supported, and the result is an agreement that gives you a token as a consumer, with which you can then access the real asset and download it and use it. And all these services are for a large part integrated and supported by a thing called connectors. And this is a quick schematic overview. So everything above the green line, you could say, is what they call the control layer. And you have connectors for all the participants, consumers and providers, and they connect in a kind of peer-to-peer mesh, and they can talk to each other using these standardized protocols. And once you have an agreement, they hand over to a non-standardized layer, which is about the data storage and sharing in a physical manner, where you really transfer the data. And this is very open. So whatever you might have already in-house as a content repository, you can keep it. You just need to link it in to your connector. And then once you have the right token, the right permission, you can share content or get it from elsewhere. So let's say the protocols are quite well specified in detail. One of the big topics we're looking at is, okay, this metadata thing. There's no real specification yet on for the different kinds of data or content that you want to tackle, what kind of metadata is useful. And so that's an effort we are undertaking at the moment. We're looking at different sources of relevant information. And in the project, we will use a minimal set just to be able to demonstrate the principles. But for sure, we don't have the ultimate wisdom in-house. And so that's certainly a topic we want to look for feedback and interactions with other experts. But three important sources are Dublin Core, which just gives us the basic technical headers, you could say, to identify assets. And it's about learning materials. We will look at IEEE LOM, learning object model. And then in the European context, in industrial use cases, which is our scope, we look at the skills and competencies and occupations catalog of the European Commission. We will try to minimize a common set from that and apply that. Some other standards underneath this whole story are in this slide. You can consult them afterwards. The slides will be shared. But so that's the catalog protocol, digital rights. So that's for the access constraints and policies, decentralized identifiers, and then the three others I mentioned just before. These are the crucial elements behind this whole story. So we're currently trying things out and integrating the different software partners platforms and seeing how can things connect. But then besides this technical work, there's also a lot of extra things that are still not proven. So for instance, on the level of governance, probably a peer-to-peer, completely symmetrical community is not sufficient. We will probably need some data space authority, which is an optional role in a data space, to make sure that partners are a bit vetted before they can join, that content is curated in some way or another. Probably that's also something we want to reflect on and to discuss with other people that might be interested in such a solution. And then, of course, we want to grow from our project with a limited number of consortium partners to a larger community. and get feedback on the principles and ultimately also on the way forward to implement this and make it grow. So okay, that's certainly a big effort still. And as I mentioned, also for the metadata, we need extra knowledge. Some more links about the data space in general, and at the end, at the end, there's a media data space out there. Here's some noise from somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from. But so the TAMS data space is probably relevant, although it's not XR related, but other type of digital media related. I guess they will have similar issues and solutions as we want. Thank you. That was it. I hope it was more or less clear. And if you have questions or suggestions, we're always interested. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Erwin. I would like to ask if there are any questions. Just as we wait for any additional questions, please free to raise your hand. I think that the concept is really clear, right? And really powerful. My only question and reaction, Erwin, is this is in a conceptual stage, is in a design stage, because I don't want to say more at this stage, but we have done this in other projects, with not with VR content, right, but with regular content in data space. And indeed, it's very challenging in the governance viewpoint because you need some federation there, and less in other aspects like security policies, digital rights management. So we encountered, a lot of complexity on all this stuff versus conventional centralized models, right, without so much sovereignty. I'm going to share with you a white paper for the monetization of this just privately.
Yeah,
but I wanted to start, what is the implementation status? And then we can go, I think, to Bruno, who raised his hand, right?
Yeah. So we've picked an open source project as a basis, the Eclipse data space components EDC project. And at the moment, the different software partners are trying to figure out the integration of the existing open source services and how to extend them and to fit them with the existing software platforms. And we've gone through the main steps of what we would like to achieve, but it's still a very preliminary and pilot phase. There's no test environment yet that we could make publicly reviewable, but we're advancing and to go, well, for sure the milestone to get things in a demonstrable status is end of the year.
Okay, and you don't have a new, it's just a collection of existing standards, right? You don't have a new standard or a new metadata schema.
Well, so that's the effort we are undertaking indeed. So let's say the protocol and the different ways they interact, different components, these are well specified, but it's the metadata that would be a result of our project as a new kind of, I would call it the metadata profile, an application profile, or and that would be a result of the project, but for which, as I said, I'm not I would say I'm not sure. No, I'm sure we don't have all the required knowledge in the consortium. But it's one of these projects with many open calls, and so we will extend in that way also our reach in these discussions, but also in the BeyondXR cluster, and even probably more general towards other digital technologies for learning, for on-the-job support. It would be great if we could have a kind of unified view that might not be limited to pure XR-specific elements, but in general, immersive.
Yeah, makes sense. Bruno, your question, please feel free to ask your question, and then we can move to the next presentation.
Okay. I hope does my video work?
Yes, I can see you.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the invitation and the presentation. It was really interesting. I'll shortly introduce myself. I'm Bruno van der Meulen from University of Leuven. I'm part of a EU-funded project Impulse on virtual immersive multi-user environments and digitized cultural heritage. How you present digitized heritage in multi-user virtual environments, how do you collaborate within these environments, sharing collections and working together on collections and presentations and interaction. In terms of metadata, I'm pleasantly surprised to see, even in this context, which is more industry-oriented, Dublin Core, because we are also struggling with the metadata part. Of course, from heritage institutions, metadata is a core of our business. We do deploy different standards depending on the type of collection, depending on the type of institution. An archive uses different metadata schemas than a library uses different metadata schemas from a museum, and depending on the type of object, you also might have different metadata schemas. But we settled here for Dublin Core, as this is the least complex metadata schema. But I'm again surprised to see this appear here in a non, let's say, heritage-oriented solution. So maybe why decision on Dublin Core?
Yeah,
Out of interest.
So I'm involved in a couple of, you could say, informal circuits about standardizing metadata across digital learning assets. And you're also in Flanders. There's a Oslo initiative,
Yep.
and so I was in a group there about digital learning objects, you could say. And there we had a kind of similar approach, mixing things that are picked from different places and then trying to merge them and get to a set of metadata that is understandable and complete for the end user community. In this case, it was in the Flemish education community. And so we're trying to do something similar now for the industrial community. But I think the basic set of Dublin Core is so generic that it's, and I think it doesn't come from the heritage community. It comes from a very generic thinking about digital resources. It's just a matter of finding the right elements and mixing them and make sure they are understandable for the end users as well, and sufficiently technically complete to have the full flow support of what we want to achieve. But the other thing you mentioned is that depending on the type of asset, the type of community, their language and their parameters might be different. And that's indeed something that we will have to learn also how to tackle that in the best way. But yeah, so Dublin Core comes from, in my limited experience, from a very generic background of identifying resources. And the main things that we also had in our own proprietary repository and that we learned are crucial. We can find them in there. So that was one of the reasons.
And if I have one follow-up question, if I may, just quick, this metadata will also be searchable.
Yeah, that's, let's say, from an end use perspective, probably one of the main, the two things. It has to give you the right context information, and it has to allow you to search to find the right things that are relevant for you. Indeed.
Okay, let's continue the discussion in the end. So for the sake of time, let's move to Professor Hel Wagner and Spirit. But because I see there are also other questions, type them in the chat. And I think, Erwin, you'll be here till the end of the webinar.
Yeah,
so
I'm staying.
Let's take the discussion in the end, right? Please, response reality, save the question. Professor, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and the Spirit project.
Okay, do you see the slide?
Not yet?
Not yet. Okay, sorry.
Now, yes.
Thank you. Yes. I plan to talk about the use of standards and the challenges of standardization in the SPIRIT project. I'm a professor at the University of Klagenfurt in the south of Austria, a small university. But we have been doing standardization work for more than 20 years, in particular, together with a colleague, Christian Timmerer, and he is the one who is basically responsible for doing the standardization work, being persistent for more than 20 years and proceeding on this topic. But some of the experiences of that work and of the standardization in the SPIRIT project will be part of the talk now. So just to briefly introduce ourselves, we are a research group called Multimedia Communication. And what we have we started basically more than 20 years ago in the AMPEG standardization community, which is an ISO-IEC group responsible for moving pictures, basically for video and audio communication compression. So well known for the AMPEG 1, 2, and 4 standards, the video compression algorithms that are around here. And this has moved forward together with ITU groups into the modern video compressors that we know. And we have started out with some metadata work as well. So digital item appeared already today in Erwin's presentation. We've worked on that, on metadata standards, but more than 10 years now, we've been doing work on dynamic adaptive video streaming called DASH over HTTP. And we have also done some work on multimedia quality of service and experience. And in SPIRIT, the project I'm representing here, of course, we are responsible and have been doing immersive content streaming, where immersive means we capture and stream and play out point cloud content and or avatars to be as immersive as possible for the viewer. So basically, most of the work has been done by my colleague, Christian Timmerer, and this work earned us over 2 years, basically his work, an Emmy Engineering Award for the group doing AMPEG Dash, where he was one of the leaders, and a second Emmy Engineering Award for a spin-off company of ours, Bitmoving, that does a special encoding technique and infrastructure, and was awarded such an Emmy Engineering Award as well. So we have quite some experience, and we build on this experience, and Christian also contributed to this talk here. So the outline of my talk is very straightforward. I briefly introduce the SPIRIT project, then go into the 2 aspects that you saw in the title, use of standards in SPIRIT, and the challenge of standardization we experienced, or I think all of you will experience. And then I try to conclude and leave you with a take-home message here. So the SPIRIT project, SPIRIT, you see the acronym here, is the project on a scalable platform for innovations on real-time immersive telepresence. So it's mainly about building a multi-site and interconnected platform or architecture for collaborative telepresence applications at scale if possible, where scale doesn't mean we have hundreds or thousands of participants, but at least in the collaborative setting, several or a few dozens at least. And SPIRIT has been going on for more than 3 years. It's an innovation action, and the basic outcome should be a SPIRIT system or platform or architecture to be used by our third-party experimenters. We did 2 rounds of open calls already. And what we initially had and what should be the outcome of the project should move from a TRL 4 to, say, TRL 6 or 7 at least. Yeah, We are close to the end of the project. This will go until the end of this year. And we have some experience already in terms of these open calls, moving on in terms of TRL levels and so on. We are quite small consortium. The most important participants are IMEC, the consortium leader, the coordinator, basically people from the University of Ghent in Flanders. These are Ericsson, this is Deutsche Telekom, Fraunhofer, HHI, guys who were for a long time responsible for progress in the video codecs, and University of Klagenfurt and University of Surrey, and now University of Bristol, because an important person moved from Surrey to Bristol in the UK. And a UK company, AWTG, and Digital for Planet, basically our communication dissemination partner here. I jump over the spirit objectives in the interest of time. This is, you can read it in the slides being provided. And I'll directly go into the spirit platform architecture. So that's the basic outcome of the project. We came up with the first version of the platform after 1 year, and then opened the platform for experimenters for open call projects to be used. And when you design such a platform, of course, you have to be open, you have to be interoperable, you have to be usable for many of these open call projects. And this set out the use of standards in our Spirit project. It's a standard platform, more or less, targeted toward immersive telepresence applications. So you have a source side and capturing media, processing media. You have a receiver side where this is being rendered, played out, and enables interaction with the viewer. And you have some server functions in a central server or at edge servers, for example, media adaptation or network monitoring. And you have a number of transport protocols that allow communication between the source and destinations, enable networking between and transport, hopefully in real time, the video data. And all this is to be integrated and based on 2 test beds, basically, one in Berlin at Deutsche Telekom. Both of these test beds are basically virtualized, containerized platforms having 5G access networks. And one is in at the University of Surrey, now in University of Bristol, with a very similar setup. And all our platform use cases and all of the open call projects have to integrate the content somehow in such a relevant environment, not just in their own lab, but really in an open test bed that supports this. And we have a third one established 1 year ago, the IMEC virtual wall, located at the University of Ghent, basically. I'll come back to that architecture because that's relevant again. We have some use cases developed by our own in order to build, test, and develop the platform further. These 2 use cases are about holographic streaming, where holographic stands basically for point cloud content. So hopefully realistic 3D content being captured by one or multiple cameras. We have one by University of Surrey, the other one for really interaction between humans by Ericsson. We have realistic avatars provided by Fraunhofer, HHI, which are animated and streamed in a very realistic presentation. And we have a machine to human use case, distributed steering of robots that capture the environment around them and can be steered from a remote location through a manufacturing hall, for example. And we have many open call projects. We had 2 waves of open call projects. We gave out 3 million euro funding. We had in all of those open calls more than 60 submissions. We selected 11 and 16 of those. So together we have 27 projects. And those, for example, contribute components to our platform. do a specific steering of remote robots, or allow, for example, extend the avatar, for example, by empathy expressions and stuff like that. Or one idea was to do remote psychotherapy, because the usual video doesn't work, so an immersive presentation of the therapist would be best here. So, and all those are building their experiments, their projects, and their software on this testbed and on our platform. In order to enable such a platform to be used by a wide range of other projects, you have to use standards. So I'm coming back to the architecture, but first let me tell you what Andrew S. Tannenbaum, one of the famous professors in computer science, said decades ago. The nice thing about standards is that you have so many to choose from. If we look at the Spirit project, this is of course nice to have, but it's also a requirement. You have to build the platform on standards in order to be useful for the other projects, in order to enable interoperability, in order to plug their components into the architecture, either at the source or at the receiver end or in a transport layer or something like that. So that means we heavily are based on standards, which means I show them a number of them, not all of them, of course, here. For example, on the source side of the media, we capture videos, encode them with the standard video encoders, AVC or HAVC. We capture 3D point clouds, encode them with Draco, which is not a formal standard, but something Google provided and which is heavily used in the community. We also use standards by MPEG, video-based point cloud compression or geometry-based point cloud compression and stuff like that. So also the avatars are, of course, using standards as well. On the receiver side, we build heavily on Unity because that's available on most headsets, on most HMDs, and is more or less an industry standard to be used. But open code projects also use WebXR, for example, because it provides higher performance or is more suited to their content. On the transport layer, our main vehicle is WebRTC for communication because it's low latency, but this is not really scalable. So we're also trying out low latency Dash, which is more scalable, but also more recent protocols like Flute, Quick, and so on. Even on the QE analysis layer, we are adhering to standards like there are recommendations how to perform subjective quality of experience studies. There are models provided by RTU, and these are being used as well. And also, of course, on the basic layer of the architectures and the test beds, we're using standard virtual machines, Dockerization, of course, all what is behind the 5G network. There's a whole bunch of standards, of course. We cannot go into details of here, of course. This is also already standard-based. In resource management, most of the projects build on Kubernetes. And we have a big block of standards concerning security, authentication, authorization, supporting confidential computing and stuff like that. So I would say dozens of standards being used in Spirit, but required also to make the platform really useful for the open code projects. And we're doing, as a project core, we're doing innovations on several of those standards, for example, by doing specific resource management schemes or trying out Flute as a broadcast protocol on the transport layer, trying out low latency Dash, comparing it with WebRTC and stuff like that. So that's the use of standard, very heavy use of standards. Let us look vice versa. How could and how did Spirit contribute to standardization? We have the same picture here, the same architecture here. And there are basically two groups of contributions. One was by Ericsson for contributions to a 3GPP standard, SA4, which is media codec systems and services, basically. They did some standardization work here. And we at the University of Klagenfurt did some contributions to MPEG groups on visual quality assessment and 3D graphics and haptics here as an outcome of our subjective quality of experience studies of the immersive presentations. So when you look at this, there's a really big discrepancy, a big gap between how we use standards and how we contribute standards. And when I realized this, I thought a little bit about this. Why is this so difficult to contribute to standards out of a European project? Spirit is going for 3 years, so it's not too short term, but it's also not long term. Why is it difficult to do that? Why didn't we come up with more contributions? So these contributions are good and remarkable, so we are entitled to do standardization contributions, but that's not really what probably should be the output, the really impactful output of a European project. So this brought me to think about the challenges of standardization in the project and beyond, and I want to share this experience with you and encourage you to still, despite the challenges, do standardization work as well. Let me cast this into 3 challenges. This is certainly not complete and there is much more, but let me try to explain it like this. Challenge number 1 is standardization is really a long-term process. It needs long-term commitment. It needs long-term persistence to be there at the standardization meeting, to always contribute until something that you have, until a tool, a concept, an algorithm, or a metadata element really comes into a established standard. So this is 2 to 3 years or even longer than that. And as I said in the beginning, we have been doing this work in MPEG for more than 20 years. As a university, you need partners. This was Siemens in the very beginning. Now it's Bitmovin, our spin-off company, who support us here as well. It also takes money because you have to be at the meeting somewhere in the world. So let me explain this in an MPEG process. The MPEG dash standard. Dash again stands for dynamic adaptive streaming over HTTP. So video streaming, dash or concept like dash are really now the basis of what you see in the internet in terms of video streaming. Some use the standard here. Apple has an own standard. Big companies like YouTube, Netflix, Amazon Prime use their own proprietary versions, but very similar concept of this. But smaller companies like small media houses that Bitmovin, for example, serves, like Spiegel or New York Times, they build upon this standard. And this started out in 2010 roughly, and came up with the first edition of the standard 2012, a second edition 2014, and then comes maintenance of the standards and extension of the standards in terms of amendment 1, 2, 3, which was then consolidated in a third version 2019, then amendment 4, amendment 5, which then was consolidated in the 4th edition, and so forth. So the standard still lives on, the extensions still are ongoing, and will result in the 6th edition of the standard, probably this year or next year is the target, I think. So this means this is roughly 15 years of standardization work that established the standard and extended it. The important thing to say here is you always have to be there. If you really want to bring your contribution, your concept, your algorithm, your tool, your metadata element into the standard, you have to be there at every meeting and push the standard and argue for it and defend it. Because if nobody is there for a tool or a metadata element, this will simply be voted out by the other participants. So it's a long-term commitment that you have to endure here. And it's not only the standard text, the conceptual thing, it's about reference software, compliance software, conformance software, and because the policy to cast everything into running software such that use cases, software tools, libraries prove the usability of the concept and so on. And there are side standards which cover specific use cases and so on. And this is still ongoing. So this has been ongoing for more than 15 years from the initial version of the start in 2010. So it's a very long-term process that you have to go through. The challenge number 2 is similar. So as I said, standardization is complex, but also standards defining organizations are complex entities. Even monitoring and assessing their activities is a complex activity. This takes time, this needs effort. You should do it only if you have a legitimate interest. For example, if you are a company that has a patent on something and you want to get that technology into a standard in order to get license income at a later point in time. And this is really related to the first challenge, really very difficult. Yeah. Standards defining organizations are kind of closed clubs in the very beginning. You have to initiate to come into this club, to become known, to make contributions, to become an appreciated member of that. And then you can have inputs and can provide real impact here. As an example, we in Spirit, of course, try to follow what's going on in the Metaverse Standards Forum. Metaverse Standards Forum, we have been trying this for 4 years, but it turned out this was really a very complex thing. The entire Metaverse Standards Forum, the many groups, the many hierarchies, the many mailing lists, and I'm still not able to have an overview of all what is going on there. So this was new to us in 2022-23, and it shows the difficulty of coming into this club, becoming a member, understanding what's going on. But be not discouraged. You have to start somewhere, and over time, it gets you into the thing. Challenge number 3 is, I think, the most important and the most difficult also. You do not want to have some additional standard or some work here. You want to do relevant, impactful, probably decisive work, decisive for the development of the technology of your company, of your research group. And this is very important to assess whether you are really doing a relevant work, impactful work. But if you get into the standards and if you are successful in that, then it really pays off. You get visibility, you get technology in the standard, you can potentially get license income later. You do not want to have this, again, from the internet, where you have a situation, you have X competing standards, and some enthusiastic people come up with the idea, we want to provide a universal standard that covers everything, every use case and stuff like that. And this ends up then in X+1 competing standards. So the relevance is really important. And yeah, we have done work on not so relevant standards in the beginning, but now MPEG- is really relevant. So let me conclude with a positive message. Of course, as also Erwin said, and we'll hear throughout this webinar, standards are crucial, very essential for interoperability, to create ecosystems, to create business opportunities. We all know that, we agree on that. Standards in European project to pursue, to contribute is possible, but due to the duration of 2, 3, maximum 4 years of the European project, it's challenging to really follow up. It's better if you establish a process that goes over several European projects and you can be persistent on pursuing your standards, tools and contributions and technologies and bringing them finally into something that's really standard in the end. It's challenging, but I really encourage you to do that because it increases visibility very much for a research group, but also for a company. We saw this at our spin-off company, Bitmove. And my final thing is a concern. We have been seeing standards in the media domain so far being very successful. But in the immersive technologies standardization landscape, in the XR landscape, which will, I think we can be agree on that, which will be very much based on machine learning models and AI in the future. My concern is, will those future immersive technologies still adhere to standards, still help us ensure interoperability, compatibility, and create business opportunities? If so, nice, but I'm a bit afraid that all these machine learning things will become proprietary closed shops in the hands of the big .com companies that we all know, like we see in the large language models today, like we see in the teleconferencing, video conferencing area. There are not too many systems to be used, and most are being proprietary to companies. And I'm a little bit afraid that this will happen in the future as well. So I think we should all try to contribute to standards, should support standards, should use standards, so that we'll still have an open, versatile landscape, also in terms of immersive technologies in the future. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. And I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. In the meantime, I can also echo what you said, that standardization process is difficult, is time-consuming, requires effort, requires consistency. And in my view, for EU projects, it's best if you have a partner which is committed and is doing this as a primary activity. Because otherwise, you know, if you do this as a side activity, even simple things like SENS and ELEC, for example, workshop agreement may have, you know, 40 meetings, right, to produce a short standardization document, not to say much more complex endeavor. So I echo what you say. Let's see, do we have any questions for the approach of Spirit? Not, we can move to the presentation of XR for Europe. Thank you very much, Professor. I hope if you can be available in the next 20 minutes, maybe we can have a discussion in the end. Michael, the floor is yours. Feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about XR for Europe and then your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Let me go ahead and share my screen just to make sure that that is working properly. Does everybody see my screen now?
Yes, it's okay. It works perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a little different compared to our two previous speakers in that I'm representing XR for Europe, which is not an EU project, but is a non-profit industry association for those who work with immersive technologies in Europe. But we are in two projects, two Horizon Europe projects. Both are CSAs, which are that have as components contributing work packages to standards in different ways. So today I'll to kind of talk about what these two projects are doing in part, but then also how that kind of fits into this this collaborative effort to develop standards, to contribute to standards. Because one of the takeaways clearly from the earlier two presentations, and I'm sure from most presentations on developing standards, is just how complex it can be, how many different stakeholders are meant to have voices, and how long it can take to bring all of these different voices together into some coherent, actionable message. So I'll be presenting a little bit about both projects, but then again, just a kind of a broader scope. So for me, as well. I'm the managing director of XR for Europe, and I'm a developer, a Unity developer on the side, but I'm not, a very technical person beyond I can make, XR applications for, kind of for end use. But and for me, standards are so much lower level, much more technical and much more, I would say, even granular. There's so many different standards that are applying to very specific components that I would use without ever realizing that I use it. So it's been an interesting experience these last couple years in this role to inform myself better what the landscape of standard SDOs are, but also what it is that they're doing or what they're attempting to do. I was interested to see the reference to the Metaverse Standards Forum in the last presentation because I as well, I actually know some people who are involved in that leadership of that effort, people like Christine Perret, and there's been invitations to become involved in that, but I often don't know where or how I would contribute, where I might fit. So that's just to mention as well. That's a very important and global effort, the Metaverse Standards Forum, but it can be difficult to know where you fit in. All right, but so I don't want to spend too much time talking about things that have already been established. But for me, for XR for Europe, the value of standards, there are many, but the one that we really focus on most is the economic benefit, the economic benefit of choice, of more competing products and services and tools, as particularly in Europe. So many of our members as an association, of course, are research institutions and national and regional associations and representative bodies, but many more of them now in recent years are SMEs. And so we're often looking at how can standards provide not just more opportunities for them, kind of open up hardware, open up software so that they can more flexibly utilize these global platforms that right now are kind of locked. And frequently we're talking about Meta platforms, the formerly Oculus and Facebook, but now Meta platforms. When they get locked kind of somewhat arbitrarily, it can really just undermine an entire business that an SME has been building up for a couple of years. And the effects are not just for them, but the effects are for their clients. And then we maybe see just a use case in Europe that then suddenly becomes not viable commercially, and that has real consequences for people who are making a career, and as well as the growth of this new sector in Europe. So we see the value of standards with a real emphasis on creating a more competitive space in Europe for more diverse offerings and at the same time more stable and secure offerings that are less susceptible to changes to some proprietary platform. So, but that all kind of contributes as well to the sovereignty and resilience priorities that the Commission is is putting forth recently. So that's just to say that. So another thing that I've been observing recently is kind of the difference in motivation between a kind of a top-down and a bottom-up to the creation of standards. And this is not, so I'm not describing like how standards themselves are actually created or made. What I'm describing here is what it seemed like a difference in terms of like how to make it, how it should be made, what the where the motivation is coming from. So increasingly in the projects that we are in and the projects that we engage with, because we have as a responsibility in XR for Human, particularly, but also in the OpenFirst project, which I'll show a little bit more later, we have this responsibility towards horizontal coordination with other EU projects and other related initiatives. And sometimes there's this top-down. We want some people want a regulatory-led effort to create a standard. So they're looking to work at the highest levels of structures, either the largest companies or again looking at regulations, or they're looking at the EU itself. And but an alternative that some other partners or some SMEs, some other communities that we engage with, some other stakeholders, they're looking at it more from this kind of almost like an open source type of method where it's a community. It's a community of enthusiasts and and then out of that arises some type of standard. And I think, you know, what ultimately Europe needs is a combination of these two, and but because they're coming from very different types of perspectives, I think it's hard to bring them into alignment. But the projects that we're in, I'll get to them in a second. The projects that we're in are attempting to do exactly that. They were really trying to engage as many stakeholders, even though the projects themselves is not the main work to create standards themselves, but it is their main work, at least in certain work packages, to kind of foster the right conditions for these standards to arise in the immersive and virtual world space. So, you know, one of the reasons why it's difficult to bring these these two efforts together, this more of a top-down motivation and this kind of bottom-up community-driven motivation. The reason why it's so difficult is because not everybody really wants the standards. So this is, you know, not new for probably anybody here, but you know, the motivations for supporting standards, particularly for companies. For countries, it's a lot easier to understand. That's why I think it's these lists are a little bit more balanced towards countries being very supportive of standards, and maybe more particularly open standards here. But for companies, it's harder because companies want this when, you know, they don't have a dominant proprietary solution. If they do have such a solution, then, you know, the motivations to support standards and open standards is not very high, or it may not be very high. And so there's a lot of resistance. And breaking free of that, being able to insulate, you know, emerging standards-oriented community, or community who's trying to build, you know, these standards, trying to insulate them from the ability to be locked out by a dominant proprietary platform is it's very, very hard work. And that's why it can't really just be so community-driven. It seems like it really needs to have this merger of this community effort and initiative doing a lot of the hard work, but then with the support of more of a top-down type of effort, which a Horizon project might represent that type of top-down effort. So let me first then talk about the Openverse project, because we have, as I said, these two CSAs that XR for Europe are partners in. We see here we have quite a lot of partners here. I think we have several also in the audience with us. So Openverse is doing a number of things, but really what it's trying to understand at its core is the standards that are there and the gaps, and to try to bring together as many stakeholders, global, but with the focus really on EU based stakeholders, but bring them together with the idea of starting to recognize what are the gaps, what's missing, and then bring these different communities together to then fill in those gaps. So there's a lot of mapping, a lot of representing these gaps and trying to make that digestible and understandable to policymakers, as well as the participants who are in these kind of emerging communities. And so these communities are both of you know, technical organizations. They may include something like an SDO, but they're not focused just on those types of organizations, but also a lot of national, regional, and sectoral focused organizations, all over Europe, and trying to build these bridges between them. So this is actually the type of activity that XR for Europe itself already does in the XR space, but Openverse takes a much broader focus, not focus, but a much broader view on the virtual world space, to try to engage with as many technology verticals that are foundational and supplemental, or even tangential to virtual world. So they're really trying to bring a holistic view of everything that contributes to virtual worlds together into these kind of working groups, into these community, smaller communities, with the idea that from this will come more concrete actions towards developing you know, standards, and not just standards, but also policies and potential future regulations, maybe informed by the conversations facilitated in these groups. So Openverse is doing all of this right now. There's another year and a half approximately to this project. So again, it's just an example of not trying to directly contribute to standards, but trying to facilitate and incubate bodies that, when working together, will contribute to these. But with standards, there's ethical standards as opposed to just technical standards. I don't mean just in a way to make it dismissive, but to say that ethical standards are this alternative that is the focus of another project called XR for Human. And increasingly, these ethical standards are really receiving a lot of attention and focus almost everywhere I go. And I think it's probably, whether they call it ethical standards or just ethics, are really probably a part of every Horizon project going forward, and maybe every EU-funded project. But ethical standards are very different, practically, than technical standards are. They, when we're drafting kind of guidance documents towards this, it's a lot more. They tend to be a lot more subjective. So they are never going to be as precise, probably, as technical standards. But they are still something that's we're finding the need to work towards. So XR for Europe is in this project called XR for Human, which is actually concluding with the final event in September of this year in Brussels on the 30th. And there, a lot of the outputs are going to be presented, particularly the code of conduct, which is, not itself a standard, doesn't label itself a standard, but in many ways is meant to inform what may continue to develop over the next few years as something that we can call ethical standards. I mean, certainly, just talking about them, the word standard frequently comes up. But again, it's not a standard in the same way a technical standard would be. But the value of these ethical standards, again, from XR for Europe's perspective, we look at it still as a contribution to the economic and competitive advantage for European SMEs and companies that are building these virtual worlds, because there's so much concern, ethical concern, and in some case fear, that really does affect and hold back the growth of use cases using these technologies, and obviously the societal and economic benefits that they may carry with them. So anything that can create a sense that European XR, European virtual worlds are safer, more pro-social, better, just better according to human-centered design and ethical context, then that creates a global competitive advantage for European exported virtual worlds. So that is one of the reasons why we do a lot in this particular project to engage SMEs in this. Even though SMEs, I would say, it's a little bit of a struggle. These are very much discursive developments. So we have to do a lot of conversation based. I mean, I guess for the technical standards as well, it was already alluded to. There's a lot of meetings that go into it, but in the ethical, towards the development of these kind of like ethical standards as such, guidance documents, there's still, it's just so much discussion because there's never a concrete final decision. There's just a guidance as to how potentially someone might make a decision for themselves. But again, if we can at least create a recognizable framework that can be shared and disseminated, and things like the code of conduct that XR for Human has created is an example of that. Not only is that something that can be guiding the design and the development and the deployment of virtual worlds, but they can also be referenced as proof that a company and an SME is following this code, and thus consumers and potential clients can, with more confidence, select their product and their service when weighing them against competitors from other domains in the world where maybe they're not following these kind of codes that are being developed. So that's just wanting to kind of wrap up now and say that these two projects are examples of what the Horizon Europe work program has been investing in, which is bringing groups together with the objective to hope that it informs the development of standards. And I hope we see a lot more of this in the future work packages, because it's, as I said, really important. And I think the preceding speakers as well talked about just again how much work it takes to bring all these groups together, the right groups together, And Metaverse Standards Forum is a really great example of a global effort, but the need in Europe for similar, maybe perhaps more focused efforts is also quite strong. And I think Openverse and XR for Human are two examples that may inform following CSA with a similar type of well, not similar, but a more focused focused work on standards development and facilitation even than these two projects have had. And yeah, and I'll leave it at that. I think for reasons of time, it's probably good to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. A lot of information to digest, maybe more horizontal information. So yeah, we are just a few minutes, before the end of the webinar. So I suggest if there are any questions, otherwise we can revert also to previous questions from Response Reality. Yeah, Professor, yes, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Michael, for bringing up ethical standards here as well. So I usually used to work in the technical domain, in technical standards, and there are two phases mostly. The first one is a competitive phase. The second one is the collaborative phase. So competitive means different ideas, technologies, tools are brought to the table, and then typically comparison is being made based on performance and key performance indicators, based on usability, based on some other metrics that you can really quantitatively decide upon. And then there is a phase where a decision is being made on one technology to proceed to the standards then. And all the participants then collaborate to improve that and make the standard really, really solid. Yeah. Is there something similar in the ethical standards domain? So you have a competitive and a collaborative phase. You mentioned this is very much discursive. There are a lot of discussions. There are a lot of meetings, stuff like that. But I really can't figure out whether there is something similar like these two phases.
Yeah, no, I think not. I would not, because the risk. So I can say, in generating the quantifiable data would be really challenging in an ethics context because it's so risk averse. So yeah, I put the term standards there as ethical standards because that's sometimes how people refer to it, but it's almost like it's just a different. The word is evocative, but it is not the same type of. It's not the same definition. It doesn't describe the same type of end result even. So yeah, I would love that we could, and maybe something where we looked at different domains, and we collected. We had not a digital, not regulatory sandbox. That's another term that's coming up a lot frequently, and in some cases they have discussions of regulatory sandboxes for ethics, but for the same reasons I said about risk aversion, no one really wants to say, well, let's see what happens if this country does something that we think may not be right, but this other country does, this other jurisdictional domain, and then collect data after some time and compare them. That would be a way to do that, but I don't know how. We wouldn't be able to do it experimentally. We would have to be able to. We could do it only observationally. So in the sense that we would identify that, for example, X country permits this type of design work, and we kind of collect, well, how often have we found negative outcomes or whatever KPI, but normally the KPIs in ethics discussion so far are negative ones. We want to facilitate, kind of pro-social behaviors through the design of these worlds, but then it's hard to define what is a pro-social behavior. Usually we just kind of focus on what are the negative outcomes, which are, again, even those negative outcomes are often, I think, informed by maybe criminal definitions. We look at harassment or assault or these types of things. These become like quantifiable, ethical failures in a platform. But yeah, it's a short answer. Apologies. The short answer is no. I think it would be very difficult right now to see how to have this quantifiable step first, this competitive step, before moving on.
Thank you.
Michael, I have a question is relates to the three presentations for me, because I'm not so involved in the XR standardization. I saw a lot of different standards, right? And a landscape which is quite difficult to navigate. So initially we talked about metadata standards, content standards, device standards, and now we ended up in the ethical. I was wondering if in XR for Europe or in Openverse, you have some taxonomy that helps, people to navigate this landscape, because it's difficult. It's really not one tier of standards here.
Yeah, I think so. Openverse absolutely has a taxonomy effort, but I don't think it's focused specifically on standards as such. However, the Virtual Dimension Center, with their database or repository rather of XR and metaverse standards, that would be the first place I think to that. But it's not it's not so visible and digestible stuff. You really have to dive into it. It probably would be nice that database could be converted into something like you're describing. But for the moment, I actually had a slide. I didn't show it because there are these other efforts. There's that the Virtual Dimension Center is doing unilaterally with their repository, but also with the Virtual Dimension Center is also working with I think with the Metaverse Standards Forum or with Perret Consulting, I forget, Perret Research, on a specific project. Maybe with that output, I don't actually know what their target output is for it, but they're doing, I believe, exactly what you're describing. I just don't know if it's going to result in a taxonomy as such.
It is useful. So the Virtual Dimensioning Center, the Virtual Dimension Center, I can find it in XR for Europe or in Openverse.
No, they're not in either. So Virtual Dimension Center is its own institution.
It's
I
own
don't know.
institution. Okay.
Yeah. Christoph Rund is the one leading it. I'm sure that's a familiar name probably to a lot of people here. Virtual Dimension Center is a really prominent institution, but this repository that they have. So maybe just something that I didn't say, but they list 1,500. I think is the last number that they've updated. 1,500 standards that they have identified as applying to XR and Metaverse. So when I was looking at it first, because there was an interview research that they're doing with the Metaverse Standards Forum, I realized that there's this list, but I can't see the standards because the standards are behind many of the standards, not all, but many of the standards are behind a paywall. So I was thinking, as if I was, I don't know, an SME or an independent enthusiast or someone, I actually cannot see these things easily. I have to. And I didn't realize that until I started looking in preparation for that interview that I realized, well, standards there's a business model to creating standards that I didn't understand at that time. So I think
this
happens
with the ISO. This happens with other organizations, right? From some point on, you have to pay to access some of these standards, right? It's not just for the XR, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, but I didn't know this. That was a bit of learning that these are not things that are publicly put out there that everyone can educate themselves on and follow. There's just a little bit more to it than that.
Thank you. Ian, what is the question? Please feel free to ask the question, open your camera.
Do you hear me?
Yes, and we can see you very well.
Super. Thanks, Michael. Nice to see you again. I'm Ian Bisco from the Trans Realities Lab in Eindhoven. Actually, I had a question, but also I had a little bit of input because I have been active in the Metaverse Standards Forum for the last year and a half, since I was invited by some people from Epic and NVIDIA. It is actually open. Anyone can basically apply and join. It's not a closed group. But I think the confusing thing is, for my mind, that it is not really an organization that's trying to create standards, because it was a spin out originally of the Kronos group. And some of you might already know this. And the Kronos group, I think, is really the part where they look as one of the bodies that can produce standards. But they are more looking at use cases. They are looking at use cases and feeding those into the standardization process. So despite being called the Metaverse Standards Forum, it's really looking at what the use cases are in different verticals from industry. So of course you find our friends from Siemens in the industry forum, you find our friends from Nokia and Japan and Korea and America in the communications forum, the network forum, and so on and so forth. So there's no, I think that's what it is. And to be honest, I don't think there's enough people active in it. Like all these things, it's surprising to me there aren't like 200 people here today having a discussion about open standards, and I think there are 20 or something. And I think that's part of the problem, because, you know, and this is kind of going into my question or other comment, that, you know, I'm in a position where I'm doing many projects where I want to build high quality, massively multiplayer, persistent virtual worlds. Firstly, there are virtually no tools that allow me to do that do not come from North America. So Unity, Unreal, Spatial IO probably has the best platform for taking content out of Unity and using WebXR. We just don't have these things. So the standards are a little loose or not existing. They haven't been implemented, or the people that are pushing the standards for by just making products are coming from the States. So it's very, very hard to actually, when I see the EU call, let's go and experiment about a virtual world prototype in the current calls, using open standards and using European technologies. We might be able to do something around a bit of NFT or ethics or something, but actually trying to build a prototype using almost anything from Europe based on some European initiated or encouraged standards. Yes, I know streaming is there, but I take this as a different element. And the last point I wanted to raise really was that there is always this confusion for me between the discussion about XR and XR as a standalone application, which is what most people are actually doing today. VR in the headset or Steam and a PC, as opposed to metaverse, which of course the EU call virtual worlds through some UN climate definition. And I think it's very, very different when we start talking about, you know, massive use of persistent virtual worlds that are consumed laying over the top of existing web technologies, as opposed to standards which are used to build headset or PC resident type applications. So sorry, a lot of input, but hopefully that's useful and may raise some other questions.
Yeah, I think because some of the standards from the Spirit presentation were exactly like this, you know, how you build metaverses. And then, you know, this becomes more complex because you have the network, the latency, so a whole new universe of standards. But that was in the presentation of Professor.
Yeah.
I don't know if the speakers want to have a final round of remarks. Otherwise, we can close the webinar and thank everybody for being here. You want to make a concluding remark, a concluding comment? Erwin, start with you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Well, I think from the presentations, as well as from Michael, as from the professor, I'm wondering if the word standard has to be taken very strictly as one of these big, long-term efforts, very formal processes, or if specifications that might be more community-driven might be as valuable in a European context, where things have to grow from the bottom up, probably through these kinds of projects, for instance, and growing awareness in a larger group of people, end users, developers, about the value of having, I would say, some kind of agreement, whether we call it specification or standard, and putting some good companies, people, projects behind this to make people aware of the value of this and get people behind this idea. So I'm wondering if we can get things going quicker by talking about specifications, which can be created in working groups and ideally an open source way of working, and not the big, huge commercial kind of setup.
More ad hoc, more lightweight, less formal. Thank you.
But then the thing is, how do you make this widely used? Yeah, you can in the European project can have a specification, and it's nice to be used in the European project or in a couple of projects or in an industry association. but how is it being used worldwide? How does it create impact? So that's the strength of the standards, that internationally companies, countries, organizations, institutes come together and agree on something, so that you can create a video in Germany and it's being streamed from Japan without any difficulties. Yeah. So that,
for instance, the Eclipse Foundation is quite successful in this way of working, I think, in different domains, and they have a specification process, a creation of specifications process and structure that might be valuable, I think.
The important thing is always to have something up and running in terms of software or support by hardware. If that's the case, if people can take some open source software or install a library and use the standard in a runnable system, then this is the best way to proliferate and make the standard widely used, I think.
Thank you, Professor. Michael, a last word from your side so that we can conclude this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question about the specifications versus standards, because I not in this particular context, but in other contexts, it's often felt like sometimes the projects, the Horizon projects, are very long. Like in some sense, maybe they're not long enough because they need more time to actually get something embedded and adopted. But in other cases, they may be actually so long that there's a certain inertia and a legacy, because then the adaptation to say, well, 2 years now, we don't need to be doing the thing we said we were going to do 2 years ago because the thing has changed, So we often say, smaller projects, cascade funding, I'm a big fan of, because cascade funding perhaps could be a way just to have smaller scale, more adaptive sub projects, but if specifications could be something like that, something a little bit more bite-sized, then it would fit in that that perception that I have. But whether it ultimately has the long-term strategic impact, that is a question that I'm not qualified to have an opinion about. But it's smaller, more bite-sized, fits with the general perception that many of us have had about the projects, that they're perhaps a little slower or locked into the previous decision making that holds them back a bit.
Excellent. I think we can document these thoughts very briefly and also share them with a partnership with other people. I think they will find them interesting. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you all to all the people that contributed. Bruno, Ian, really thanks. That is what it's all about, right? Having a nice interaction. And let me just say once again that this webinar has been recorded, so we're going to share the recording and the presentations with other people in our community. Thank you for being here. If I don't see you, enjoy a good summer break, and see you soon. Bye.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.